It was the kind of Tuesday where the world felt like it was holding its breath. The dinner rush at Church's Chicken had long faded, leaving only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sizzle of grease in the fryer. I stood behind the counter, my sneakers sticking slightly to the linoleum floor, refilling the sweet tea dispenser. The air smelled of fried batter and disinfectant, a combination that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. My name tag, pinned crookedly to my polo shirt, read KK in bold black letters. It wasn't my dream job, far from it, but at 19, with rent to pay and accounting classes to slog through, it was a lifeline. The pay was better than McDonald's, and Richie, my boss, let us take home the mess-ups biscuits, too hard, chicken too crispy. It wasn't much, but it kept me fed. The door chime snapped me out of my routine. A man stepped inside, and something about him made the air feel heavier. He was medium height, maybe mid-30s, with a plain gray t-shirt and jeans that looked like they'd been washed 100 times. Nothing remarkable except his eyes. They locked onto me. Not the menu board, not the counter, but me, with a focus that felt like a physical touch. I forced a smile, the kind you practice in customer service, and set the tea jug down. He approached the counter, his steps slow, deliberate, like he was savoring the moment. Welcome to Church's. What can I get started for you? My voice was steady, professional, but my fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, just a little too close, and his lips curved into a small, private smile. 3-piece, dark, he said. Finally, his voice low, almost intimate. Mashed potatoes and gravy on the side. I punched the order into the register, my eyes flicking to the screen to avoid his gaze. That'll be $7.49. Anything else? He didn't move, didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he tilted his head, reading my name tag, as if it were a secret he'd uncovered. KK, he said, drawing out the letters like they were a melody. KK. That's pretty. His voice wrapped around my name, twisting it into something I didn't recognize. My skin prickled, a warning I couldn't quite place. I forced a laugh short and tight. Thanks. $7.49, please. He reached into his pocket, pulling out exact change quarters, dimes, nickels, counting them out slowly into my palm. His fingers brushed mine, damp and cool, like he'd been holding something wet. I jerked my hand back, the coins clinking onto the counter. You smell nice, he said, his eyes never leaving my face. Like vanilla, I froze. I did use vanilla body, wash cheap stuff from the drugstore. Nothing special. But the way he said it like he'd been close enough to know it intimately, made my stomach twist. Thanks, I mumbled, shoving the coins into the register. Your order number's 42. We'll call it when it's ready. He didn't step back. He lingered watching me as I handed him his receipt. His smile grew just a fraction, like he knew something I didn't. Finally, he moved to the pickup counter, but his eyes stayed on me, unblinking, as if he were memorizing every detail. The way I tucked my hair behind my ear, the way my hands shook slightly as I wiped down the counter. When Dev, my coworker, called his number, he grabbed the bag, gave me that same small smile, and left. The door chimed behind him, and the air felt lighter, like a storm cloud had passed. I told myself it was nothing. Creepy customers weren't new. Construction workers sometimes got too chatty. Old men made weird comments. But this felt different. His words clung to me like the smell of grease in my hair after a shift. You smell nice. Like vanilla. I shook it off, focusing on the next customer, but a part of me kept glancing at the door, half expecting him to walk back in. That night, I drove the 15 minutes to my rental house, a small 2-bedroom in an older subdivision. The neighbors were close enough that I could hear their TV through the walls, see their dogs sniffing around my yard. It was a safe place, or so I thought. I locked the front door behind me, double-checking the deadbolt, a habit from living alone. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a soda, and headed to the bathroom for my nightly shower. The bathroom was small, with a frosted glass window facing the side yard. You couldn't see through it, just blurry shapes and shadows, but it always made me feel exposed. I turned on the water, letting the steam fill the room, and stepped under the spray. The vanilla body wash sat on the ledge, its scent mingling with the heat. As I scrubbed the day's grease from my skin, I noticed a shadow pass by the window, a vague, human-shaped blur. It paused, lingering for a moment, then moved on. I told myself it was the Barnes family next door, walking their beagles. It happened all the time, but the shadow had felt wrong, too still, too deliberate. I finished my shower, quickly, wrapping a towel around myself and stepping into the hallway. The house was still, but the unease from earlier lingered like a boot dream I couldn't shake. I glanced at the front door, making sure the deadbolt was still in place, and went to bed. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, his voice echoed in my mind. Kai, that's pretty. I pulled the blanket tighter, telling myself it was just a weird day, just a weird customer, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something about him had marked me like a fingerprint I couldn't wash off. The days that followed were a blur of routine classes, shifts, study sessions. But his face lingered in the back of my mind, his voice a whisper I couldn't silence. Thursday came like a slow poison creeping into my bones. I was back at churches, working the register during another slow evening. Dev was in the back, prepping for the next rush, and the restaurant was empty, except for the hum of the AC and the faint crackle of the radio. The door chimed, and my heart sank. It was him. Same gray t-shirt, same jeans, same slow, deliberate walk. He didn't look at the menu, didn't pretend to browse. His eyes found me immediately, and that small, private smile curved his lips. I gripped the counter, forcing my voice to stay steady. Welcome back. What can I get for you? 3-piece dark, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Mashed potatoes and gravy. The same order, word for word. He stepped closer to the counter, closer than he needed to, and I caught a faint whiff of something metallic, like old pennies. I punched in the order, my fingers trembling slightly. 7 49s, please. He leaned in his elbows, resting on the counter, his face inches from mine. You look tired, KK, he said, his tone almost tender. Long day, I froze. I was tired. I'd stayed up late, studying for an accounting exam, my eyes burning from too much coffee and too little sleep. But how did he know? It was the kind of thing you say in passing a casual observation, but coming from him, it felt like a violation. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just a long day. You should get more sleep, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly, like he was studying my reaction. What time did you finally get to bed? Midnight. Later, my breath caught. I'd gone to bed just after midnight, my phone screen glowing as I scrolled through study notes. It was a lucky guess, I told myself. Lots of people stay up late, especially students. But the way he said it, the way his smile widened as he watched me squirm, made my skin crawl. I don't know, I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. 749, please. He counted out exact change, again his damp fingers brushing mine as he placed the coins in my palm. Vanilla, again, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Do you use that every night around 10:30? The world tilted. I fumbled the coins, one slipping through my fingers and clinking onto the counter. My shower routine was clockwork, 10:30 p.m. after my shows every night. How could he know? My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe I'd mentioned it to a coworker and he'd overheard. Maybe it was another guess. But the precision, the way he leaned in, drinking in my discomfort, told me it wasn't random. He knew. I handed him his receipt. My hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped it. Order number 47. We'll call it when it's ready. My voice was barely audible, but he didn't seem to care. He lingered, watching me with that same unblinking stare until Dev called his number. He grabbed his bag, gave me a slow nod, and said, "See you later, KK." The door chimed as he left, but his presence clung to the air heavy and suffocating. I told Dev about him. During cleanup, my voice shaking, as I recounted the details, his comments about my sleep, my shower, my scent. Dev frowned, wiping down the fryer. "That's messed up, KK. You should tell Richie. Maybe we can get him banned." I nodded, but a part of me doubted it would help. Richie was all about keeping customers happy, not making waves. Still, I found him in the office, hunched over paperwork. "Hey, Richie, there's this guy who keeps coming in. He's weird. Says creepy stuff, like he knows my routine." Richie barely looked up. "What? Like he complimented your perfume?" "That's not enough to ban someone. KK, tell me if he does something worse, okay?" I left the office, feeling smaller, dismissed. That night, I drove home with the radio off my eyes, flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The subdivision was quiet, the street lights casting long shadows across the pavement. I parked in my driveway, my heart pounding as I scanned the yard. Nothing. Just the neighbor's beagle barking in the distance. Inside, I double-checked every lock, front door, back door windows. The house felt too big, too empty. I pulled the bathroom blinds all the way down, even though the frosted glass was impossible to see through. The door didn't lock. Old houses, painted over mechanisms, but it latched shut. I made sure of it, hearing the faint click as I closed it. I turned on the shower, the steam curling around me, and tried to wash away the day. The vanilla body wash filled the air, its scent, once comforting, now tainted by his words. "Do you use that every night around 30? As I rinsed my hair, I kept my eyes on the frosted window, half expecting that shadow to appear again. It didn't, but the unease grew a knot in my chest that wouldn't loosen. I stepped out, reaching for my towel, and froze. The bathroom door was wide open, not cracked, not ajar, but flung wide, revealing the dark hallway beyond. My heart stopped. I'd closed it. I'd heard the latch. I stood there, dripping wet, clutching the towel to my chest. listening for any sound, a creak, a footstep, anything. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it. Old houses settle, I told myself. Doors pop open. Latches slip. But the silence was worse than any noise. It was the kind of quiet that hid things, that let your imagination fill in the gaps with horrors you couldn't name. I wanted to call out, to demand who was there, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Instead, I moved slowly, checking each room, flipping on every light. The living room was empty, the kitchen untouched. My bedroom door was closed, just as I'd left it. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking softly, and stepped inside. The familiar clutter textbooks on the nightstand, laundry in the corner should have grounded me, but it didn't. The air felt wrong, too thick, like someone had been breathing it before me. I reached for my dresser, needing to get dressed to feel less vulnerable. My fingers brushed the drawer handle, and then I heard it. A giggle, soft, muffled, but unmistakable, coming from the closet. My body went cold. The sound wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like someone trying to stay quiet and failing. The closet door was closed, its chipped paint glowing faintly in the lamplight. I stood frozen, my hand still on the drawer, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The giggle came again, quieter this time, but closer, as if whoever was in there was pressing their face against the door, listening for my reaction. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. My mind raced, grasping for explanations. A prank, a roommate. I didn't have anything but the truth I could feel in my bones. Someone was in my house. Someone was in my bedroom, hiding, watching, enjoying my fear. I backed away, slow and deliberate, like I hadn't heard a thing. My phone was on the nightstand, just out of reach. I moved toward it, my eyes never leaving the closet door, expecting it to fly open at any moment. I grabbed the phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. But before I could hit call, instinct took over. I ran. Barefoot, still in my towel, I bolted down the hallway, through the living room, and out the front door. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, but I didn't stop. I sprinted across the lawn, my feet slipping on the wet grass, until I reached Mrs. Chittles' porch. She was there, watering her plants, despite the late hour, her silhouette framed by the porch light. Mrs. Chittles. I gasped, my voice raw. Someone's in my house. She dropped the watering can, her eyes wide as she took in my state, half naked, dripping wet, shaking. "Oh, honey, come inside," she said, pulling me into her house, and locking the door behind us. She didn't question me, didn't hesitate. She called 911, her voice calm but firm, while I sat on her couch, clutching a blanket she draped over me. The operator promised police were on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. Through Mrs. Chittles' window, I watched as 2 police cars pulled up their lights, flashing silently. The officers surrounded my house, their voices sharp as they announced themselves. I held my breath, waiting, praying they'd find whoever was in there. 5 minutes later, I saw him. He came flying out the back door, a blur of gray and denim, trying to leap the fence into the barn's yard. The cops were on him before he could make it, pinning him to the ground. Even from a distance, I knew it was him. The man from Churches. David, an officer, came to Mrs. Chittles' house to take my statement. She was kind, her voice gentle, but her words cut through me like a knife. We found wet footprints throughout the house, she said. In the bathroom, the bedroom, even the kitchen. The shower walls were streaked with water at face height, like someone had pressed their body against them. His shirt was soaked across the chest, and there was water on his mouth. I felt sick. The image of him in my shower, his face against the tiles where I'd stood, his tongue tasting the water that had touched my skin. It was too much. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to block it out, but the officer kept talking. He knew where your spare key was, she said. Under a fake rock by the door. He'd been in your house before, likely multiple times. They found notebooks in his car, she told me. Pages filled with my schedule, when I worked, when I studied, when I showered. He'd sketched my yard, my windows, even made in crude, obsessive detail. He'd been watching me for weeks, maybe months, before he ever stepped into Churches. His name was David, and he had a record peeping, breaking and entering, but nothing violent. Yet, you're lucky, the prosecutor would later say. These types escalate, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, stripped bare in a way I couldn't explain. He'd been in my house, in my space, breathing my air, while I thought I was alone. And that giggle, that soft, stifled sound from the closet, it haunted me, a reminder that he'd been there, waiting, savoring my fear. Safety is a lie we tell ourselves. After that night, I couldn't go back to the house. I broke my lease, paying a penalty I couldn't afford, and moved in with my cousin across town. The new place was smaller, a basement apartment with bars on the windows, but it felt safer, at least at first. I quit Churches, unable to face the counter where David had stood, his eyes boring into me. I got a job at an office one, with keycard access and security cameras. where no one could just walk in. David got 18 months, but the prosecutor warned me he'd likely serve only 6. "You can get a restraining order when he's out," she said. But her tone told me what I already knew. A piece of paper wouldn't stop him. Not someone who'd licked my shower walls, who'd giggled in my closet, who'd filled notebooks with my life. I changed everything. My gym, my grocery store, my routes to work. I stopped using vanilla body wash, switching to something sharp and citrusy. But sometimes, in the steam of the shower, I'd catch a phantom whiff of vanilla, and my heart would race. The fear followed me, a shadow I couldn't outrun. I'd wake up at night, convinced I'd heard that giggle again, soft and muffled just beyond the walls. I'd check the locks, the windows, the closets, even though I knew he was in jail. It wasn't about him anymore. Not really. It was about the violation, the knowledge that someone could know me so intimately, could slip into my life without me ever noticing. He'd taken my sense of safety, and I didn't know if I'd ever get it back. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman with a soft voice who told me I was experiencing hypervigilance, a common response to trauma. She taught me breathing exercises, ways to ground myself when the panic came. But no amount of deep breaths could erase the memory of that open bathroom door, the wet footprints trailing through my house, the sketches of my face in his notebook. I'd sit in my new apartment, the TV on low, to drown out the silence, and wonder what he'd planned that night. If I'd stayed, if I'd gotten dressed, if I'd gone to bed, what would he have done? The question was a knife twisting in my gut, and I had no answer. Sometimes I'd drive by my old house just to see it. The new tenants had moved in a young couple with a dog. I wondered if they felt safe, if they checked their locks, if they ever noticed a shadow by the frosted window. I never stopped to ask. I didn't want to know, but I kept the fake rock, the one that had hidden my spare key in a box under my bed. It was a reminder, a warning that safety was fragile, that trust could be a trap. I don't know if David will come back when he's released. I don't know if he still has those notebooks, if he still thinks of me, if he still smiles, that small, private smile. But I know I'll never feel alone again. Not really. Every creak in the night, every shadow in the corner carries his voice, his eyes, his giggle, and somewhere in the quiet moments, I can still hear him saying my name. Kai, Kai. That's pretty. The church exhaled at night, its stone walls breathing secrets into the dark. St. Agatha's stood at the edge of town, a relic of a time when wealth poured into carved wood, and stained glass, when faith was built with hammer and chisel. By the time I started working there, it was just another old building, creaking under the weight of its own history. I was a junior in college, a history major, drowning in textbooks and rent payments, when Garrett, my roommate, mentioned the church was hiring a night custodian. 20 hours a week, $10 an hour, mostly emptying trash and mopping floors. I needed the money badly, so I said yes, without much thought. What could be so hard about cleaning a church? Father Brennan interviewed me in his office, a small room cluttered with books and faded photos of past congregations. He was older, with a gentle voice that carried the weight of decades, and he seemed more interested in my class schedule than my qualifications. When I mentioned my history major, his eyes lit up, and we ended up talking about medieval monasticism for 20 minutes before he remembered to offer me the job. I started that Monday nervous, but relieved to have something steady. Diane trained me. She was a short woman with graying hair, always pulled into a ponytail, her hands rough from years of cleaning chemicals. She moved through the church like it was her own home, pointing out where the supplies were kept, which doors stuck, how to coax the ancient boiler into working. "This place is old," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. "Built in 1892. It's got character, but it takes getting used to." The church had an underground level, a warren of storage rooms, a furnace room, and an old crypt from when burials were still done on church property. Diane showed me the crypt door, a heavy slab of wood with iron hinges tucked in an alcove near the boiler. "Always check?" "It's locked," she said, her fingers lingering on the handle. "It works loose sometimes. Building settles, you know." I nodded, though something about the door, its weight, its silence, made my skin prickle. She mentioned the previous custodian, Rory, while showing me how to clean the altar without knocking over the candlesticks. "Young guy, like you," she said. "Worked here 8 months, then started getting flaky. Late shifts calling out, then he just stopped coming. Never picked up his last paycheck." She paused like she wanted to say more, then moved on to explaining which products to use on marble versus wood. I didn't press her, but the way her eyes flicked to the crypt door stuck with me. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to midnight, Monday through Friday. The church closed at 7 after evening mass, so I had the place to myself. I liked it at first. The quiet was peaceful, a stark contrast to my noisy apartment. I'd bring my laptop, take breaks between tasks to work on papers, the glow of the screen, a small comfort in the vast sanctuary. The building creaked and groaned, as old buildings do, but it never bothered me. It felt safe, sacred, like nothing bad could happen under those high, vaulted ceilings. But even in those early days, I noticed things. Small things. The air in the basement was heavier, like it held on to the cold longer than it should. The crypt door, despite being locked, always felt like it was watching me. Its iron hinges glinting in the dim light. And sometimes, when I mopped the sanctuary, I'd feel a prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was standing just out of sight. I told myself it was the solitude, the way empty spaces play tricks on the mind. But deep down, I knew the church wasn't as empty as it seemed. The weeks passed, and the church's quirks became routine. The stuck doors, the temperamental boiler, the faint echoes of my footsteps in the sanctuary. But then late September, about a month into the job, something changed. It started with the mud, small clumps of it, like a secret the church couldn't keep. I noticed it while mopping the sanctuary. Little smears of dirt, no bigger than a quarter, scattered across the floor. They always seemed to start from the side hallway, the one leading to the crypt, and trail into the main sanctuary, stopping near the pews. Middle left 8th row, back 8L, as I'd come to call it. At first, I thought it was from the morning mass crowd, someone with dirty shoes. But then I realized I was finding it in the mornings after I'd already cleaned. Fresh mud on floors I'd mopped just hours before. I mentioned it to Diane the next time I saw her, catching her in the supply room as she restocked bleach. "You ever find mud in the sanctuary?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Like fresh mud even after a dry spell. She froze just for a second, her hand tightening on a bottle, where she asked, her voice too even, from the crypt hallway to the pews. Middle left 8th row. Her eyes flicked to mine. Not quite worry, but something close. "I've seen it," she said finally. "Mornings when I come in for daily mass, always clean it up before anyone else notices." She paused, then added, "Always starts from that hallway, doesn't it?" "Leads to 8L. I nodded, a chill settling in my chest. We compared notes. The tracks were consistent, same starting point, same destination. Too long, too narrow, with a dragging quality, like whoever left them was limping. And they weren't tied to weather. We'd had no rain for weeks yet. The mud appeared twice a week, sometimes 3, with no pattern I could pin down. "Make sure that crypt doors locked," Diane said, her voice firm. "Not just closed, locked. Test the handle." I do it every morning now. I started paying closer attention after that. I'd check the crypt door at the start of every shift, then again at the end. It was always locked, the handle solid under my grip. But the mud kept coming. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a leak in the basement. Maybe animals sneaking in. but nothing fit. The tracks didn't match any shoes I could identify, and they always stopped at 8L, like that pew was a destination, a purpose. One night in October, I decided to check the crypt door mid-shift around 10 p.m. instead of waiting until the end. The basement was colder than usual, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and rust. I descended the narrow stairs, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark, and approached the alcove. The door loomed ahead, its wood darker than I remembered, the iron hinges glinting like eyes. I tested the handle, locked unyielding. I let out a breath, telling myself I was being paranoid, and turned to head back upstairs. As I passed through the sanctuary, my eyes caught on 8L. There was mud on the seat, fresh, still damp, glistening under the dim lights. A handprint marked the back of the pew in front of it, the fingers too long, the palm too narrow, like something not quite human had rested there. My heart thudded loud in the silence. I checked the crypt door again, my hands shaking. Still locked. But now, there were mud tracks leading from the pews back to the hallway, like something had returned the way it came. I didn't sleep that night. The image of that handprint, those dragging tracks, burned into my mind. I mentioned it to Father Brennan the next day, trying to sound casual, like it was a prank or a maintenance issue. Maybe someone's sneaking in at night, I said, forcing a laugh. Leaving mud everywhere, he went quiet, his fingers pausing on the rosary he always carried. Have you seen anyone? He asked, his voice careful. No, I admitted. Just the mud. And a handprint once, he nodded. Slowly, his eyes distant, then changed the subject. But his reaction gnawed at me, a confirmation that something was wrong. I started digging after that, spending my breaks in the church's archive room, a dusty basement space filled with boxes of records. Diane had given me the key weeks ago, so I could vacuum in there. I pored over old burial ledgers, looking for something, anything, that might explain the mud. In a ledger from 1958, I found him. Lawrence Vogel, a homeless man who'd been sleeping in the church during the winter months. Father O'Brien, the priest at the time, had let him stay in the basement, giving him odd jobs for food and money. The entries stopped abruptly, followed by a single note about his burial in the crypt, February 1959. No cause of death listed, but a margin note in different handwriting read, "Found in pew 8L each morning. Would not leave. Growing thin." I stared at the words, my pulse racing. Pew 8L. 8th row, left side, middle section. The same pew. Something was in that church with me, and it had a name. The sanctuary was never the same after I learned his name. Knowing about Lawrence Vogel didn't make the mud disappear. It made it worse. Every clump, every smear felt like a message, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I started watching 8L obsessively positioning my laptop where I could see it, while I worked my eyes darting to the pews between tasks. The church, once a refuge, became a maze of shadows. Every creak, a warning. Every flicker of light, a threat. I told myself I was imagining things, that old records and late nights were getting to me. But the mud kept coming, and so did the feeling of being watched. It was a Thursday night in early November when it happened. I was vacuuming the sanctuary, the hum of the machine drowning out the church's usual groans. The lights were low, casting long shadows across the pews, and the air felt heavier than usual, like a storm was brewing inside the stone walls. I glanced at 8L, as I always did, and froze. There was movement. A shape dark against the darker church, rising from behind the pew as if it had been lying on the floor. It sat in 8L, perfectly still, facing forward, like it was waiting for Mass to begin. I stood, rooted to the spot, the vacuum still running. Its cord tangled around my feet. The figure was tall, too tall. Its silhouette, wrong joints, too sharp, limbs too long. I couldn't make out its face in the dim light, but I felt its presence, heavy and deliberate, like a weight pressing on my chest. It didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, just sat there, its head tilted slightly, as if listening to a sermon only it could hear. I shut off the vacuum, the silence crashing over me like a wave. The figure turned its head slow and deliberate, and I saw its eyes. They weren't human. They reflected light that wasn't there, glowing like a cat's, but set in a face that was too thin, too hollow. The air grew colder, the smell of damp earth filling my nose, and I realized I was holding my breath. The figure spoke, or tried to, a wet, struggling sound, like water trapped in a throat. Not words, but something trying to be words, a plea, or a prayer, or a curse. Mass, it might have said, or last. Or maybe it was just the sound of something that had forgotten how to speak. I backed away, my hands trembling, until I hit the sacristy door. The figure stood unfolding rather than rising its joints, bending at angles that made my stomach lurch. It stepped into the aisle, and I saw its feet bare caked in mud, leaving those dragging tracks I'd been cleaning for weeks. It didn't move toward me, didn't chase, but its eyes stayed on me, unblinking, as if marking me for later. I turned and ran. leaving my supplies, my laptop, my keys, sprinting to my car, and driving home without looking back. I called Father Brennan from my apartment, my voice shaking as I lied about being sick. "I can't come in tonight," I said, expecting him to push back. But he didn't. "I understand," he said, too quickly, like he'd been waiting for this call. His tone told me he knew maybe not everything, but enough. I lay awake that night, the image of those eyes burning into me, the sound of that voice echoing in my head. Mass. Last. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something I wasn't meant to, that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But here's the thing about being broke in college. You can't just quit. Rent was due in a week, and I had no savings, no backup plan. So when Father Brennan called the next morning, asking if I was feeling better, if I could come in to retrieve my things and finish the week, I said yes. I had to. The church was waiting, and so was Lawrence. Returning to St. Agatha's was like stepping into a dream you can't wake from. I went back the next night, right after the church closed. My stomach knotted with dread. Diane was there, which surprised me. She usually worked mornings. She had my laptop and keys waiting in the office, cleaned and neatly arranged, like she'd known I'd run. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the church pressing around us, until she spoke. "You figured it out, didn't you?" "About Lawrence?" I nodded, my throat tight. "The records. 1958. He died here." She sighed, her eyes distant. "There's more to it." Lawrence was dying when Father O'Brien took him in. Tuberculosis, probably, though they never confirmed it. He spent his last weeks in that pew, 8L. Too weak to move, praying day and night. When they found him, he'd been hid for days, but he kept coming back. Every night, same pew. They tried everything, blessing the crypt exorcism, moving his body to the cemetery. Nothing worked. He always returned. I stared at her, the words sinking in. "So you just let him stay?" She nodded. "We learned to live with him. Keep the crypt door locked to slow him down. Give people time to leave. Clean the mud so parishioners don't ask questions. He's not dangerous. Not really. Just persistent." She paused, studying me. "You staying?" I wanted to say no, to walk away and never look back. But I needed the job, the money, the stability. "I'll stay," I said, my voice barely audible. Diane taught me the real routine then. Lock up by 9:30 before Lawrence usually appeared. Check the crypt door, but don't linger. If you see him, don't run it. Startles him, makes him move wrong, leaves too much mud. or broken things for the morning mass. Back away slowly. Let him have his pew. He'll go back to the crypt around 2 or 3 a.m. She offered me afternoon shifts, 4 to 8 p.m. Less pay, but I stuck with nights. Hazard pay, she called it, though she never used the term officially. I worked there another year and a half, until graduation. I saw Lawrence maybe a dozen times, always in 8L, always with those reflecting eyes. Once near Christmas, he nodded at me, a small gesture like recognizing a fellow regular at Mass. It should have terrified me, but it didn't. It felt like an acknowledgement, a truce. The worst nights were when he didn't show up. I'd wonder where he was, what was keeping him, and I'd prop a chair against the sacristy door, staying there until my shift ended. Diane retired while I was there. Marcella took over the morning shift, and I trained her just as Diane had trained me. Here's where the supplies are, I said. Here's how the boiler works. Here's what to do about the mud. She took it better than I had, nodding calmly. My grandmother saw things like this in the old country, she said. It's just part of life. My last week, I left a note in 8L. Thank you for letting me work here. It felt stupid as soon as I did it. But the next night, the note was gone, and there were muddy fingerprints on the pew where it had been. Maybe he took it. Maybe it was a coincidence. I didn't ask. Father Brennan retired right after I graduated. Father Wen runs St. Agatha's, now a young priest with a practical streak. He had the crypt door reinforced steel frame, better locks, and brought in industrial cleaners for the basement. Garrett still attends Mass there sometimes. He mentioned they've switched to a daytime cleaning service. More efficient, he said. But last month, he told me they're looking for a night security guard. Someone to walk through, check the doors, make sure everything's locked. The cleaning crew keeps finding mud in the mornings, tracked through the sanctuary, and no one can figure out where it's coming from. I thought about calling Father Wen, warning him. But what would I say? That the church has a guest who never leaves. That he needs someone who understands the real job. Someone who knows when to clean and when to look away. He'll figure it out. They always do. And somewhere in town, there's a college student desperate enough to take the job, thinking it's just checking locks and walking halls. They'll learn, just like I did, that some pews are never empty and some guests never leave. The forest held its breath, and so did I. The summer camp sat in the middle of nowhere, a cluster of cabins surrounded by towering pines and dirt roads that twisted into oblivion. The lake, still patched with ice on the far end, shimmered under a gray sky, its surface unbroken except for the occasional ripple. I'd been a counselor at this place for 2 summers, leading kids through canoe races and campfire stories. But this was different. It was spring, a month before the season started, and the camp was empty, silent waiting. My boss, George, had asked for volunteers to clean up before opening day. Light work, he said, just clearing debris, fixing bunks, sweeping dust. I signed up partly for the extra cash, partly because I knew the place like the back of my hand. But nothing prepares you for a place that feels alive when it's supposed to be dead. 5 of us showed up. Me 2 older guys from maintenance, a fellow counselor named Aaron, and George. He'd been running the camp since the late 80s. A gruff man with a bushy beard and a coffee mug that never left his hand. Despite his rough edges, he was a gentle soul, the kind who'd slip kids extra marshmallows at the campfire. We gathered in the mess hall for a briefing, the air smelling of old wood and tall coffee. George assigned us cabins to clean his voice steady, but tired, like the forest had worn him down over the years. I got cabins 5 and 6, a short walk past the main clearing tucked near the woods. I didn't mind the solitude. The quiet was what I loved about this place, or so I thought. Cabin 5 was easy. The door gave way with a gentle push, revealing a familiar scene. Dusty bunks, spider webs in the corners, a single broken window latch. I swept the floor, wiped down the surfaces, and taped a note about the latch for George to check later. The work was mindless, the kind that let my thoughts wander back to college, to the summer ahead, to the kids who'd soon fill this place with noise. By noon, Cabin 5 was done, and I felt a small surge of pride. 1 down, 1 to go. Cabin 6 was different. The moment I stepped onto its porch, the air changed. The forest, usually alive with bird song, or the rustle of leaves, went silent, as if someone had flipped a switch. The wood under my boots creaked, not with the usual groan of old boards, but with a low, almost deliberate sound, like a warning. I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, my heart beating faster than it should have. I told myself it was just nerves, the isolation of the off-season playing tricks. I unlocked the door, expecting the familiar, musty smell of a closed-up cabin. Instead, a wave of stench hit me, mold mixed with wet wood, and something sharper, like rotten eggs. My eyes watered, and I held my breath stepping inside. The cabin looked normal enough. Bunks were neatly tucked in the corner. Cubbies, closed drawings from last summer's campers, still pinned to the walls. But the smell was overwhelming, clinging to my clothes, my skin, my lungs. I crossed to the back window, hoping fresh air would help, and cracked it open. The forest outside was still not a bird, not a breeze, just an endless stretch of pines that seemed to lean closer as I watched. I shook off the unease and started inspecting the cabin, looking for the source of the smell. The bunks were clean, the floorboards solid, but on the far right bunk, I saw it, a dark stain, running down the mattress like muddy water had soaked through. I knelt to inspect it, the wood beneath soft and bloated, giving off that same vile odor. I tapped it with my gloved knuckle, and it yielded slightly still damp. I checked under the cabin, crawling into the foot-high gap between the floor and the ground, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing but a few candy wrappers and dirt. No dead animals, no leaks, nothing to explain the stain or the smell. I stood up, brushing off my jeans, and told myself it was probably a roof issue. But when I looked up, the ceiling was clean. No watermarks, no cracks. The unease grew, a knot in my stomach I couldn't ignore. I snapped a few photos of the bunk with my phone, planning to show George later, and finished sweeping, leaving the windows open to air out the stench. As I left, I glanced back at the forest, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching too far across the clearing. Something was watching, and it wasn't human. That night, the smell followed me. It clung to my clothes, my hair, even after a shower, back at the lodge where we were staying. I couldn't shake it, that sour mix of mold and decay, like the forest itself had exhaled it into me. We sat around the dining table in the mess hall, me, George, and one of the maintenance guys, trading stories to pass the time. George was halfway through a tale about a raccoon that died in the pantry when I brought up cabin 6. The bunk in the back right corner, I said, pulling out my phone to show the photos, smells like something died. I checked underneath, but there's nothing. George took a long sip from his mug, his eyes flicking to the photos. Cabin 6. Huh? He said, his voice flat. That place always gets the worst of it in spring. Probably a mouse nest under the floorboards. We sealed it up years ago, but moisture creeps back in. His words were calm, practiced, but they didn't land right. There was something in his tone, a hesitation, like he was reciting a script he didn't believe. I nodded, not wanting to push, but the knot in my stomach tightened. The maintenance guy changed the subject, and we moved on to other tasks. But George's reaction stuck with me. He knew something, and he wasn't saying it. The next day, Aaron and I were tasked with moving gear from storage to the main lodge. She was a veteran counselor like me, quick with a laugh, but sharp when it came to the kids. As we hauled boxes of life jackets, I told her about cabin 6, the smell, the stain, George's vague response. She stopped raising an eyebrow. "Cabin 6, she said, her voice low. "Did George tell you about what happened there?" I set down my box, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" she sighed, glancing at the woods, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It's probably nothing but a few summers back, before you started. There was an incident. One of the campers, a girl about 10, kept saying she saw someone in the woods outside cabin 6. A woman, she said, standing between the trees, watching all night. Counselors thought she was making it up. Kids do that, you know. But one morning, she was gone. I stared at her, the air growing heavy. "Gone, yeah?" We did a full sweep of the camp hours of searching. Found her back in her bunk, curled up, shaking, soaked head to toe, like she'd fallen in the lake. She wouldn't talk, just kept saying she was hiding from the woman in the trees. Her parents pulled her out after that. There was some talk about the camp's safety, but George swore he fixed whatever was wrong with that cabin. The story settled over me like a fog. I thought of the stain, the smell, the way the forest had gone silent. "Did they ever figure out what happened?" I asked. Aaron shrugged. "They said she must have wandered to the lake, got scared, came back. Traumatized, you know. But that girl, she wasn't the type to wander off. And that smell you're talking about, I've heard other counselors mention it, always in cabin 6. I didn't say much after that, but the story burrowed into my mind, twisting with every step back to the lodge. The forest felt different now. Its silence, not peaceful, but oppressive. Like it was holding a secret. It didn't want me to know. That night, I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, the smell of cabin 6 still lingering in my memory. I kept seeing that stain, the way it seeped into the mattress, like the cabin itself was bleeding. Something was wrong with that place, and it wasn't just mice. I decided to go back to cabin 6 the next day. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I needed to see it again, to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. I waited until the afternoon, when the sun was high, hoping daylight would strip away the unease. The path to the cabin felt longer than before, the pines looming closer, their branches brushing my shoulders like fingers. When I reached the porch, the silence was thicker, the air heavy with that same sour stench. I unlocked the door, my hands steady, but my heart racing, and stepped inside. The cabin looked the same, bunks in place, drawings on the walls, but the smell was stronger, almost sweet now, like rotting fruit. I checked the back right bunk. The stain was still there, darker, as if it had spread overnight. I knelt to inspect it, the wood beneath still soft, still damp. I pressed my hand against it, and the mattress sagged, releasing a puff of that vile odor. I stood my eyes, scanning the room, looking for anything out of place. The windows were still open from yesterday, but the air felt stagnant, like the forest was refusing to breathe. Something moved in the trees outside, a flicker of shadow, too quick to be sure. I told myself it was a deer, a raccoon, anything but what Aaron's story had planted in my mind. The forest didn't just watch it whispered. I couldn't shake Aaron's story, the image of a girl, soaked and shivering, hiding from something in the trees. I told myself it was just a kid's imagination, a one-off incident. But the smell in cabin 6, the stain, the silence, they didn't add up. I went through the motions of my tasks the next few days, cleaning other cabins, hauling supplies. But my thoughts kept drifting back to that bunk, that smell, that flicker of movement in the woods. I knew I'd have to go back, not in daylight, but at night, when the camp was quiet and the truth couldn't hide. I waited until everyone was asleep. The lodge silent, except for the soft snores of the maintenance guys. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out the cold air, biting my skin as I followed the path to cabin 6. The forest was pitch black, the pines swallowing the moonlight, their branches forming a canopy that felt more like a cage. My boots crunched on the dirt, the only sound in a world gone mute. When I reached the cabin, the stench hit me before I even stepped onto the porch, stronger now, sweet and sickly, like fruit left to rot in the sun. The door was unlocked. I froze my hand on the knob. I'd locked it yesterday. I was sure of it. I remembered the click, the resistance of the latch. But now it turned easily, the door swinging open with a low groan. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam sweeping the room. The bunks were still the drawings untouched, but the air was heavy, oppressive, like the cabin was holding its breath. I moved to the back right bunk, my heart pounding. The mattress had been flipped neatly, deliberately, so the stained side was hidden. I knelt, shining my light on the wood beneath. It was still damp, still soft, but something else caught my eye. A small wooden panel at the base of the bunk, about the size of a floor tile. I hadn't noticed it before, too focused on the mattress. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the edge, and heard it. A scrape, slow, muted, like a fingernail dragging across wood. I froze, my breath shallow, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound came again, deliberate from beneath the panel. I told myself it was a raccoon, a mouse, anything to keep my heart from exploding. Against every instinct, I leaned closer, shining my light into the seam. The wood was cracked damp, and there wedged into the gap was something long and dark, like a fingernail, but too long, too thin, too wrong. My body went cold, my pulse a drum in my ears. I backed away, stumbling into a chair, which clattered to the floor. The scraping stopped, replaced by a silence so thick it pressed against my skin. I ran. I didn't lock the door, didn't look back, just bolted through the dark, the forest a blur around me. I could feel it, something behind me, not chasing, not moving, but watching its presence, heavy in the air. When I reached the lodge, I slammed the door shut and collapsed on the floor, my breath ragged. I didn't sleep that night. The image of that fingernail burned into my mind, the sound of that scrape echoing in my ears. Something was in that cabin, and it wasn't a mouse. I told George the cabin smelled worse, but not the whole truth. I couldn't bring myself to say it. The flipped mattress, the scrape, the fingernail. It sounded insane, even to me. The next morning, I found him in the mess hall, sipping his coffee as always. "Cabin 6 is bad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The bunks still leaking, and the smells getting worse. He nodded his eyes on his mug. "That place always gets the worst of it in spring," he said, his voice flat, like he was reciting a line he'd said too many times. "I'll take care of it." He didn't look at me, didn't ask questions, just took another sip and walked away. I knew then that he wasn't surprised that he'd heard this before, maybe from other counselors, other summers. The rest of the week passed without incident, but I avoided cabin 6. I stuck to the main clearing, the lodge, the safer cabins, but the forest felt different now. The pines weren't just trees, they were eyes, watching, waiting. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a figure between the trunks, a woman in the trees. Erin noticed my unease, but she didn't push. "You okay?" she asked once, her voice soft. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Before I left, I went back to cabin 6, just once in broad daylight. I had to see it to prove I hadn't imagined it. The door was locked this time, the latch secure, but the smell was still there, fainter, but unmistakable. Inside the mattress had been replaced, the stained one gone. The wooden panel at the base of the bunk was nailed shut, fresh hammer marks glinting in the sunlight. I didn't touch it, didn't look too closely. I didn't need to. The forest outside was silent, but not empty. Something was still out there, waiting, whispering in the spaces between the trees. I never told the others what I'd seen, what I'd heard. I didn't know how. George didn't bring it up again, but I saw the way he looked at cabin 6, the way he avoided its path. He knew. Maybe he'd always known. The camp opened a month later, filled with kids and noise. But I didn't go back that summer. I couldn't. The memory of that fingernail that scraped that silence, it followed me a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd lie awake at night, wondering about the girl, the one who'd seen the woman in the trees. Had she heard the scrape, too? Had she felt the forest watching? And what was it out there in the pines that wanted to be seen? The glow of my monitor was my world, a flickering universe where I was king. Streaming had been my escape for 3 years. A small corner of the internet where I, twitchy dude, played indie horror games and retro classics for a modest crowd of 150 viewers on a good night. It wasn't fame, but it was enough to cover my half of the rent on the Portland suburb apartment I shared with Jess, enough to keep the dream alive. My setup was nothing fancy. A second-hand desk, a decent mic, and a webcam that made me look slightly less washed out than I felt. The chat was my lifeline, a scrolling cascade of usernames and emojis that lit up the dark hours. And then, polar night, appeared a spark in the void that changed everything. It was during a Silent Hill 2 playthrough, the fog of Silent Hill, wrapping my screen in gray as I navigated James Sunderland through his haunted town. The chat was lively, throwing out jokes about the clunky voice acting when Polar Night 2 popped up. His first message was sharp, clever, a quip about Pyramid Head that made the whole chat erupt in laughter. I read it aloud, my voice cracking with amusement, and thanked him. Then came the donation. $5. Nothing huge, but the message attached was gold. Keep running from Pyramid Head. Dude, he's got your number. The chat loved it, and so did I. A good viewer, the kind every small streamer prays for, engaged, supportive, the type who keeps the energy up when the game lags or the stream stutters. He kept coming back, night after night. $5 here, 10 there, always with a message that hit the mark, referencing inside jokes from the community, or poking fun at my terrible aim in Resident Evil. Within a month, he was my top contributor, not dropping hundreds like some whale, but consistent $20 every stream, each donation paired with a witty note that kept the chat buzzing. He remembered things too. When a regular Pixel Panda mentioned their dad was in the hospital, Polar Night 42 donated $50 with a message. Hope your dad pulls through, Panda. Stay strong. It was the kind of thing that made you feel seen, like he wasn't just a name in the chat, but a part of the family we'd built. I leaned into it, reading his messages with extra flair, giving him shout-outs. Polar Night, you legend. I'd say, grinning at the camera. Jess would tease me about it, sprawled on the couch behind my setup, scrolling through her phone. "Your boyfriend's back in the chat," she'd say, laughing, but I could tell she liked the energy he brought. Streaming was my thing, not hers. She worked at a marketing firm downtown, all business suits and early mornings, but she supported me, even if she didn't get the appeal of watching some guy fumble through amnesia. The apartment was our bubble, a cozy 2-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of the neighbor's overgrown yard. We'd been together 4 years, living together for 2, and it felt solid, like we were building something real. Streaming was my side hustle, my passion, and Polar Night was its heartbeat. His donations, a steady pulse that kept me going. I'd stay up late, long after Jess went to bed, tweaking my setup or planning the next stream, the glow of the monitor washing over me like a second skin. But every light casts a shadow, and I didn't see his coming. The shift started small, so subtle I barely noticed. Polar Night 2's messages got specific. He'd ask about my schedule, not just when's the next stream, but exact times down to the minute. You starting at 8 p.m. sharp tomorrow. Dude, I plan my breaks around you. It was flattering at first, the idea of someone rearranging their day for my stream. But then he'd get annoyed if I was late. His messages sharp-edged. "Where you at?" "Dude, you said 8. Don't keep us waiting." I laughed it off, thanking him for his dedication. But a prickle of unease settled in my chest, like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Then came the personal questions. A $10 donation with a message. "What part of Portland? You in?" "Dude, I'm local. Maybe we're neighbors." I deflected, keeping my tone light. "Somewhere with too many hipsters." "That's all you need to know," I said, forcing a chuckle. The chat laughed, but Polar Night 2 didn't. Another donation. $20 this time. "You mentioned that gym on 23rd Street once. That your spot?" My stomach twisted. I had mentioned a gym months ago in a throwaway comment about skipping leg day. How did he remember that I ignored the question, moving on to the game? But the chat felt heavier, like the air had thickened. Jess noticed. I was off my shoulders tense as I shut down the stream that night. "You okay?" she asked, setting her phone down. I told her about Polar Night 42, how his questions were starting to creep me out. She frowned, her brow furrowing. "Just ban him," she said. "If he's making you uncomfortable, he's not worth the money." I nodded, but I didn't do it. Not yet. He was my top donor, my biggest cheerleader. Banning him felt like betraying the community I'd built. But the splinter was digging deeper. and I couldn't ignore it much longer. The chat wasn't a safe space anymore. What started as a spark of connection with Polar Night 42 had turned into a slow-burning unease, a shadow that grew with every stream. His donations kept coming, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a needling intensity that made my skin crawl. He'd drop $20 with messages like, "What car you drive?" "Dude, saw a blue sedan outside that coffee shop on Burnside." "Yours?" I'd never mentioned my car, never said I went to that coffee shop. The chat noticed two regulars, like Pixel Panda, calling him out, "Chill Polar." That's creepy. But he doubled down his messages, defensive. "I'm your biggest fan. Dude, I deserve to know you better than these fakes." I tried to keep it light, laughing off his questions, but my voice sounded hollow, even to me. Jess saw it eating at me, the way I'd check my phone obsessively, refreshing my socials to see if he'd messaged there. "Ban him," she said, again, her voice sharper now. "This isn't worth it." But I hesitated. Streaming was my lifeline, not just for money, but for the community, the sense of belonging. Polar Night was a part of that, or so I told myself. I didn't want to admit how much his words were getting under my skin, how they followed me off stream into the quiet moments of my life. His questions grew bolder, more invasive. A $50 donation. "What time does Jess get home from work? Bet she looks cute in that blue coat." My heart stopped. Jess did have a blue coat, a bright one she wore to her office job. I'd never mentioned it, not once. The chat went quiet, the usual flurry of emojis replaced by a tense void. I thanked him for the donation, my voice tight, and moved on, but my hands were shaking. That night, I told Jess everything, his questions, the coffee shop, the coat. Her face paled. "He's stalking you," she said, her voice low. "You need to stop this now." I promised I would, but I didn't. Not yet. The donations were too good, the community too precious. I told myself I could handle it, that he was just an overzealous fan. But the unease grew a weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I started double-checking the locks on our apartment, glancing out the window at the street below, half expecting to see someone standing there watching. The apartment, once our sanctuary, felt exposed, like the walls were too thin to keep him out. The breaking point came during a charity stream, a 12-hour marathon for Extra Life. I was 8 hours in, exhausted, but buzzing with adrenaline, the chat alive with support, as we neared a couple grand raised. Polar Night had been there all day, his messages increasingly aggressive. He called out other viewers, labeling them fake fans, saying he was the only one who really cared. Then came the donation, $100, the biggest he'd ever given. The message popped up on screen, and the world froze. Nice to know your real last name. Redacted. Saw you at that Burnside coffee shop last week. Keep up the good work. My face went cold, my voice catching as I read it aloud out of habit. I'd never shared my last name, not on stream, not anywhere. And the coffee shop, I went there sometimes to edit videos, but I'd never told the chat. The room spun the chat silent, every viewer waiting for my reaction. I thanked him through gritted teeth, my fingers hovering over the ban button. I switched to a break screen, my hands shaking, and banned him quietly, hoping he wouldn't notice right away. But he did, and the fallout was immediate. Within minutes, my phone lit up with notifications. Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn flooded with messages from burner accounts. Ungrateful, they said. You'd be nothing without me. You'll regret this. Screenshots of every donation he'd ever made, demands for refunds, accusations that I'd betrayed him. I blocked and reported them, but new accounts kept popping up, each one angrier, darker. One message stopped me cold. I know where you live. Dude, saw Jess leave this morning in her blue coat. My stomach dropped. He'd described our apartment building, red brick corner lot, the cedar tree out front. It was too specific, too real. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained. They listened, took notes, but their response was maddeningly calm. No direct threat, they said. Document everything. But we can't do much unless he acts. I wanted to scream. He was acting, watching my apartment, knowing Jess's schedule, digging into my life like a parasite. But they left, and I was alone with my phone. The notifications still coming, each one a knife in my gut. He was out there somewhere, and he was closer than I'd ever imagined. The internet wasn't just a platform anymore. It was a trap. Polar Night 42's ban didn't stop him. It unleashed him. The messages kept coming, a relentless tide from new accounts, each one more unhinged. You owe me one, said with a screenshot of a $200 donation total. I made you, and you threw me away. Another described my morning routine. Coffee at 7 a.m., gym at 9, streaming by 8 p.m. Details I'd never shared. Details he shouldn't know. I stopped streaming for a few days, hoping he'd lose interest. But the silence only made it worse. The messages turned gleeful, taunting. Miss me yet? Dude, your chat's dead without me. Jess was pulling away. She'd always been my rock, the one who laughed off my streaming stress. But now she was distant, always on her phone, working late more often. I tried to talk to her about polar night, about the fear that kept me up at night, but she'd cut me off. It's just an internet troll, she'd say, her voice flat. It's part of the job. It stung hearing that from her, the same woman who'd told me to ban him weeks ago. I didn't know what had changed, but the space between us grew a crack I couldn't bridge. I found out by accident. She'd left her laptop open on the couch, a Facebook message notification flashing on the screen. "Miss you too," it read. "Can't wait to see you in person." My stomach sank. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The messages went back weeks, starting with compliments on her Instagram posts, evolving into daily conversations, flirty texts, plans to meet that weekend while I was streaming. The guy was a trainer at a downtown gym, his profile polished, his headshot screaming fitness influencer. I felt sick, betrayed, but the timing gnawed at me. This had started right after I banned Polar Night 2. The confrontation was ugly. I showed Jess the messages, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. She turned it on me, accusing me of snooping, saying I'd been distant obsessed with my stupid streaming drama. I pointed out the timing, how this trainer appeared the moment Polar Night 2 went off the rails. She got defensive, her face flushed. "Not everything's about your streaming career," she snapped. But I couldn't let it go. I pushed her to check the profile to search for the guy at the gym. She rolled her eyes, but agreed. And an hour later, she called me back, her voice trembling. The gym had never heard of him. The phone number was a burner app. The photos were stolen stock images from fitness blogs. It was a lie, all of it. I did my own digging, running a reverse image search on the trainer's photos. They traced back to 3 different accounts, none local, none real. The Facebook profile had been created 3 weeks ago, right after the ban. Polar Night 42 wasn't just a stalker. He was a puppeteer, pulling strings I didn't even see. He'd catfished Jess, fed her lies, turned her against me. She'd shared things with him, intimate details about our life, our fights, my insecurities, things he'd weaponized in his messages, taunting me with details only she could have given him. Jess wanted to fix it, to work through it, but the trust was gone. She'd chosen a fake over me, given him ammunition to tear my life apart. We broke up that night, 4 years shattered in a single conversation. I crashed on my buddy AJ's couch, my world reduced to a duffel bag and a laptop. But Polar Night 42 wasn't done. He knew about the breakup almost immediately, his messages turning gleeful, vicious. "You deserve this," he wrote. "Lost your girl, your stream, your life. This is just the beginning." He included details, things Jess and I had said in private, things no one else could know. He'd been inside our relationship, and I hadn't even seen him coming. The internet has a long memory, and so does he. I moved back to my parents' house in Eugene, a defeated retreat to my childhood bedroom. I told them I needed a break from streaming from Portland, from everything. They didn't push, didn't pry. Just let me settle into the quiet of their home. But the quiet wasn't safe. Polar night, Two's messages followed me slower now, but no less chilling. An email to an old account. "Nice to know you're back with Mom and Dad." Dude. A package arrived at the house, an empty box with a note. "Remember when you had a career?" My dad wanted to call the cops again, but I was too tired, too broken. I just wanted it to stop. 2 weeks in, I woke to my mom screaming in the backyard. Mocha, our fat orange tabby, the cat who'd slept on my bed for 15 years, was lying by the fence, stabbed still warm. My mom was devastated. My dad furious. But I was numb. I knew who'd done it, even if I couldn't prove it. Polar night, Drutu, had crossed from the digital to the real, and he'd left a wound that wouldn't heal. I deleted everything: my Twitch account, my YouTube archives, my Discord server. Years of work, thousands of hours, a community I'd built from nothing, gone. I changed my handles, made everything private, tried to disappear. I got a job at a hardware store, boring and anonymous, the kind of place where no one knows your last name unless they need to. I started therapy, a quiet woman who specialized in trauma, who helped me rebuild some semblance of normal. The messages stopped after Mocha, as if he'd won, as if killing her was his victory lap. But I knew he was still out there, somewhere with screenshots of my life, my real name, my pain. Jess texted, sometimes apologizing, saying she was in therapy too, working through how she'd fallen for his lies. I didn't respond. That chapter was closed, sealed shut by betrayal and blood. I still get the itch, sometimes the urge to stream when a new game drops, to feel the buzz of a live chat, the energy of a community. But then I think of Mocha, of Jess, of my mom's face that morning, and the itch dies. I Googled my old username once out of morbid curiosity. A Reddit thread in a streaming subreddit asked what happened to me. Most comments said I'd burned out like so many small streamers do. But one account created that day replied, He learned his lesson. I closed the tab, my heart pounding, and turned off my computer. I play games offline now, alone, invisible. It's safer that way. But some viewers never leave, and some ghosts live in the chat forever. The morning was a thief stealing warmth from the world before the sun could rise. It was 1973, and my dad was 12, a skinny kid with a bike too big for him, pedaling through the quiet streets of our hometown to deliver the morning paper. He told me this story only once at a family barbecue when I was 16, complaining about my part-time job at Subway. He'd had a few beers, his tongue loosened by the rare indulgence, and the words spilled out like a confession he'd kept locked away for decades. His paper route was 43 houses a circuit he could finish in under an hour if he hustled up at 5 a.m., done by 6:15, just in time for breakfast and the school bus. He made $2.70 a week. Good money for a kid back then, he said, though I laughed, unable to imagine a world where that bought anything worthwhile. But there was one house on that route that changed him a place he'd never forget. The Brenneman house was number 37, a big Victorian set back from the street, its paint peeling like old skin, its lawn a tangle of grass that grew too long, too wild. Mrs. Brenneman lived there alone, a widow whose husband had died in Korea. No kids, no visitors, no trace of life beyond the weekly envelope in the mailbox stuffed with exact change for the paper, old bills that smelled of mothballs tucked in every Friday like clockwork. Dad had been delivering there for 6 months and had never seen her, not once. The other paper boys had stories, though. Jimmy, a kid with a gap-toothed grin, swore he'd seen her watching from an upstairs window, a pale shape behind yellowed curtains. Mike, older and meaner, claimed she was scarred from a fire, her face a ruin, which was why she never left the house. Kid stuff. Dad said the kind of tales boys tell to make a boring job feel like an adventure. But the Brenneman house wasn't like the others. The other houses had life dogs, barking lights, flicking on the clink of coffee cups through open windows. Number 37 was silent, always the kind of quiet that felt like it was holding its breath. Dad would toss the paper onto the porch, aiming for the mat by the front door, and pedal away fast, not because he was scared, not exactly, but because the house felt wrong, like it was watching him. The windows were too dark, the air too still, and sometimes, as he rode off, he'd feel a prickle on his neck, like eyes boring into his back. He never looked, just kept pedaling the rhythm of his bike, a shield against whatever lay behind those curtains. He'd wake before dawn, the world wrapped in a cold gray haze, and load his bike with papers, the weight of them pulling at the handlebars. The route was muscle memory, left on Maple, right on Elm, a loop through the cul-de-sac. But the Brenneman house always loomed in his mind, a dark spot on the map he couldn't avoid. He'd ride past it, the creak of his pedals loud in the silence, and try not to think about Jimmy's pale shape or Mike's burned face. He'd toss the paper, hear it thump against the porch, and move on, telling himself it was just a house, just a job. But every Friday, when he collected that envelope, the mothball smell would cling to his fingers, and he'd scrub his hands raw when he got home, as if he could wash away the unease. That November, the air turned sharp, the first hard freeze of the season, icing over his bike seat. He scraped it off with his glove, his breath puffing in the dark, and set out the papers, heavier than usual, with Thanksgiving sale inserts. His fingers were numb. By the time he reached the Brenneman house, the street lights casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. He slowed his bike, wobbling, and prepared to toss the paper as always. But something stopped him. The front door was open, just a crack. The glass storm door glinting in the pre-dawn light. He froze his hand on the paper, his heart beating too fast. In 6 months, that door had never been open. Not once. He squinted, trying to see through the darkness. A lamp glowed somewhere inside, casting a faint yellow light that outlined a figure standing just beyond the storm door. It was her Mrs. Brenneman, he assumed, wearing a pale blue gown, her white hair loose and tangled, spilling past her shoulders. She raised a hand, slow and deliberate, gesturing for him to come closer. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and he felt it in his bones. But she was old, alone, maybe hurt. He couldn't just leave. He propped his bike against a tree, his legs heavy, and walked up the path, the cold biting through his jacket. The air around the Brenneman house was wrong, like it had been drained of life. As Dad approached the porch, his sneakers crunching on the frost-covered path, the silence grew thicker, pressing against his ears. The storm door was cold under his fingers. The glass fogged with condensation, and through it, he could see her more clearly now. Mrs. Brenneman stood just inside her gown, hanging loose on a frame, too thin, too frail. Her hand was still raised, beckoning, but it was her face that stopped him cold. It wasn't a face, it was a ruin. The skin on the left side hung loose like wet wallpaper, peeling from a wall, sagging toward her jaw. Her eye on that side drooped almost to her cheek, still attached, but dangling like it was melting. The other side was taut too smooth, like a mask stretched over bone. He wanted to run, to drop the paper and bolt, but his legs wouldn't move. She smiled, or tried to, and the movement made more skin slide, bunching at her chin like melted wax. The smell hit him, then a wave of decay, rotting flesh, old bandages, something chemical and sharp, like antiseptic gone bad. It filled his nose, his throat choking him. She opened her mouth, and a sound came out. Not words, but a wet, gurgling noise, like she was trying to speak through water. Come, it sounded like, or maybe help, but the words were wrong, twisted, as if her throat couldn't form them right. Dad's heart pounded his breath shallow, but he couldn't look away. Her hands reached for him, fingers too long, too thin, like they'd been broken and healed wrong, over and over. The lamp inside flickered, casting shadows that made her face shift, the loose skin swaying like a curtain. He took a step back, the paper still clutched in his hand, and she moved closer, stepping onto the porch. The storm door creaked open, and the smell grew stronger, a sickly mix of death and medicine that made his stomach lurch. Her good eye, brown cloudy but sharp, locked onto his, pinning him in place. She wasn't just a woman. She was something else. Something broken beyond repair. He stumbled backward, his foot catching on a loose board, and the paper fell, landing in the frost with a soft thud. She lurched forward, her movements uneven, dragging, like her body didn't fit together right. The gurgling sound came again, louder, more insistent, and he realized she was trying to say his name. He'd never told her, never spoken to her, but somehow she knew. The thought snapped something in him, and he ran his bike, forgotten his legs pumping as he sprinted down the street. Behind him, he heard her steps, irregular, scraping, like she was dragging herself after him. The sound faded as he put distance between them, but it followed him, echoing in his mind, a wet, wordless call that wouldn't let go. He didn't stop until he reached the end of his route. His hands trembling so badly he could barely grip the handlebars. He tossed the last papers from the middle of the street, not caring where they landed, and pedaled home, the cold air burning his lungs. When he got there, his mother was in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal, the smell of it warm and familiar. She took one look at his face, pale, wide-eyed, and set the spoon down. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. He told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. The open door, the woman, her face, her smell, her voice. He expected her to dismiss it, to say he'd imagined it, but she didn't. She listened, her face tightening, and told him to skip the Brinneman house from now on. Throw the paper from the street, she said. Don't go near that place. He nodded, but the image of that face, that sagging skin, those 2 long fingers, burned into him. He couldn't sleep that night, lying in bed, with the covers pulled tight, listening for that gurgling sound in the dark. Something had seen him, and it wasn't letting go. The world wasn't the same after that morning. Dad went back to his route the next day because he had to. Because $2.70 a week was his pride, his contribution to the family. But the Breineman house was different now, a shadow that loomed over every street, every turn. He followed his mother's advice, tossing the paper from the street, aiming for the lawn instead of the porch. He didn't look at the windows, didn't linger, but he could feel it, the weight of eyes on his back, the same prickle he'd felt before, only stronger now. The house was awake, and it knew him. He didn't tell the other paper boys. Not Jimmy, not Mike. Their stories, pale shapes, scarred faces, felt childish now, too small for what he'd seen. He couldn't explain. It couldn't put words to the way her skin had moved, the way her eye had hung loose, the way her voice had clawed at his mind. He kept it inside, a secret that grew heavier with every dawn, every ride past that house. He'd see the envelope in the mailbox on Fridays. The mothball smell stronger, now mixed with something else, something sour, like the air around her. He'd grab it and ride away, his hands shaking, scrubbing them until they were red when he got home. School was a blur. His friends' chatter fading into the background. He'd catch himself staring out the classroom window, expecting to see her standing there, her face half fallen, her hand raised. He started taking different routes, home, avoiding the street where the Breineman house stood, but it didn't help. The memory followed him, a weight he couldn't shake. He'd wake in the night, convinced he'd heard that gurgling sound, that dragging step just outside his window. He'd check the locks, pull the curtains tighter, but the fear was inside him now, a guest that wouldn't leave. His mother noticed the change, the way he was quieter, jumpier, his eyes darting to the door every time a car passed. She didn't ask about the house again, but she'd watch him when she thought he wasn't looking, her face lined with worry. One night, over dinner, she asked if he wanted to quit the route. "We'll figure out the money," she said, her voice soft. But he shook his head. Quitting felt like letting her win, letting that house, that face, take something else from him. He'd finish the route, he told himself, but he'd never go near that porch again. But some things don't let you run, no matter how fast you pedal. The weeks turned into months, and the Breineman house became a ritual of avoidance. He'd ride past at dawn, his breath puffing in the cold, and toss the paper without looking, his heart pounding until he was blocks away. The other boys noticed he was different, quieter, but they didn't push. Jimmy stopped talking about the pale shape. Mike stopped joking about scars. Maybe they saw it in his eyes, the way he flinched at shadows, the way he never laughed as loud anymore. The route was his duty, but it was also his prison each morning, a test of courage he wasn't sure he could pass. He kept expecting to see her again, waiting at the door. Her hand raised her face, falling apart. But the door stayed closed, the windows dark, and that was worse somehow. The silence felt like a trap, like she was waiting, biding her time. He'd lie awake, replaying that morning, the sagging skin, the dangling eye, the smell that clung to him like a curse. He'd wonder what she'd wanted, why she'd called to him, why she'd known his name. The questions were a weight pressing down on him, and the answers were out there in that house, behind that door. And he knew deep down that the house wasn't done with him. The Breineman house burned in 1981, but it never really left. Dad was 20 by then, long done with his paper route, working at a garage, and trying to forget the morning that had changed him. He heard about the fire from his mother, who called him one night, her voice low. "Lightning strike," she said, but there was something in her tone, something unspoken. The house was gone, reduced to ash and rubble. But they found things in the basement medical equipment boxes of skin grafts, experimental treatments from a VA hospital. The kind they used on burn victims, Dad said the kind that failed in ways they didn't write about in journals. They found her body, too, or what was left of it, curled up in the basement, like she'd been hiding from the flames. Dad drove by the lot years later, when I was a kid, just to see it. The land was empty, a square of dead grass where the house had stood. Nothing grew there, not a weed, not a blade, like the soil itself was cursed. He didn't say much, just stared out the car window, his hands tight on the wheel. I was too young to understand, but I remember the way his face looked pale, distant, like he was seeing her again, her face falling, her eye dangling. He never went back, never spoke of it again, except that one night at the barbecue, when the beers loosened his tongue and the story spilled out. I think about it sometimes, what he saw, what it did to him. He's older now, his hair gray, his hands rough from years at the garage. But there's a part of him still on that route, still 12, still pedaling past that house. He checks the locks at night, even now, and I've caught him staring out the window, like he's waiting for something to step out of the dark. The Breineman house is gone, but its shadow lingers in the way he flinches at certain smells, the way he avoids old Victorian houses on his drives. The face that fell took something from him, and it never gave it back. I've driven by that lot myself. Curious, maybe reckless. It's still there, still empty. The grass still dead, even after all these years. The neighborhood has changed. New houses, new families. But that square of land is untouched. A scar on the street no one talks about. I sat in my car, watching it, half expecting to see her, a pale shape in a blue gown. Her hand raised her face, falling apart. I didn't, but the air felt wrong heavy, like it remembered her. I wonder what she was, what those treatments did, why she stayed in that house, hidden from the world. I wonder if she's still there, in some way, waiting for another kid on a bike, another paper to land on her porch. And I wonder if my dad, somewhere deep down, is still running from her, and always will be.